In the faraway village of Silk, where the rivers flowed like silver ribbons, there lived twin sisters named Ilara and Mora. They looked exactly alike, with hair as dark as midnight and eyes as bright as stars. But while their faces were mirrors, their hearts were opposites. Ilara was kind and gentle. She could weave cloth that made sick people feel better just by touching it. Mora, however, was filled with green envy. She wanted to be the special one, but her weaving was always rough and scratchy. The villagers loved Ilara, and this made a dark shadow grow inside Mora's heart. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my folktale story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. On their 18th birthday, the royal oracle arrived in a golden carriage. She came to test the sisters for the gift of the loom. The winner would marry the prince and heal the dying king. The oracle held out a bundle of raw, grey wool. "Touch this," she commanded. Ilara reached out her hand. Instantly, the grey wool turned into shining, soft gold thread. The crowd gasped in wonder. Then, Mora touched it. The gold turned back into dull, grey dust. The oracle shook her head sadly. "One has the light," she said, pointing to Ilara. "The other has only shadow." Mora ran away from the cheering crowd, her face burning with shame. She did not go home. Instead, she ran to the forbidden edge of the market, where the sunlight never seemed to touch the ground. This was where the shadow merchant had his shop. He was a strange old man who wore a hood that hid his eyes, and he sold things that no honest person would buy. He was waiting for her, leaning against his cart filled with jars of dark liquids and twisted roots. "I saw what happened," the merchant whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves crunching. "It is not fair, is it? You have the same face. You should have the same power." Mora wiped her tears. "I want what she has. I want the applause. I want the prince." The merchant smiled, showing sharp, yellow teeth. He pulled out a small, silver mirror from his dusty sleeve. "Look," he said. Mora looked into the glass. She did not see herself crying. She saw herself wearing a golden crown, sitting on a throne, with the handsome prince holding her hand. It felt so real she reached out to touch it. "I can make this mirror your reality," the merchant hissed. "But magic is not free, little weaver. The price is always something you love." Mora stared at the crown in the mirror. "I will pay anything," she promised. The next morning, Mora decided to test if she could be like her sister. She sneaked into Ilara's room while Ilara was gathering berries. Mora found a beautiful white ribbon that Ilara had woven. Mora touched it, closing her eyes and wishing for it to turn gold. But when she opened her eyes, the white ribbon had turned a sickly, dark gray. It looked like it had been burned by fire. Mora realized the truth with a sinking heart: she did not have the magic to create. She only had the power to destroy. Panic rose in her chest. She grabbed a pot of yellow dye from the shelf and dipped the grey ribbon inside. It came out looking gold, bright and shiny. It wasn't magic, it was a lie. But to the eyes, it looked the same. "I don't need magic," Mora whispered to herself, her hands stained yellow. "I just need to be clever." Suddenly, the loud sound of trumpets echoed through the village. Mora looked out the window. The royal caravan was coming down the mountain road. The prince had arrived a day early to take the chosen weaver to the palace. Mora's heart raced. She had run out of time. If Ilara met the prince today, Mora would be nothing forever. She threw the dyed ribbon on the floor. She needed a stronger spell, and she needed it now. Mora ran back to the shadow merchant, breathless and desperate. "The prince is here," she cried. "I need to become her. I need to take her place right now." The merchant nodded slowly. He reached into a black velvet box and pulled out two things. The first was a small purple bottle. This is the draft of silence, he explained. One drop, and she will sleep like the dead. When she wakes, she will have no voice. The second item was a thin veil that looked like it was made of smoke. And this is the mask of smoke. Wear it, and everyone who looks at you will see the golden weaver. But be warned, he raised a crooked finger. You must never let pure water touch your face. Water washes away all lies. If you get wet, the mask will vanish. Mora grabbed the items. I will be careful. What is the price? A memory, the merchant said. Give me the memory of the happiest day you shared with your sister. Mora hesitated. She remembered the day when they were children, laughing in the rain, sharing a sweet bun. It was a warm, bright memory. She looked at the purple bottle. She gritted her teeth. Take it, she said. Instantly, her mind felt colder, as if a fire had gone out. The memory was gone. She felt nothing for her sister anymore. Night fell over the village. The sisters sat in their small cottage, preparing tea. Elara was excited and nervous about meeting the prince. I am scared, Mora, Elara said softly. I have never left the village. Don't worry, Mora said, her voice steady. She poured the tea, slipping the purple liquid into Elara's cup. Drink this. It will calm your nerves. Elara smiled, trusting her twin completely. You are the best sister, she whispered, and drank the tea. A moment later, Elara's eyes rolled back, and she slumped onto the table. The silence in the room was heavy. Mora didn't wait. She signaled to the window. Two dark shadows, servants of the merchant, slithered in. They picked up Elara's sleeping body and carried her out the back door to a cart meant for trash. Mora quickly put on Elara's finest white dress. She placed the mask of smoke over her face. It dissolved into her skin, making her glow with a false light. She looked radiant. She looked exactly like the golden weaver. Suddenly, a heavy knock pounded on the front door. Open for the royal guard, a deep voice boomed. Mora took a deep breath. She stepped over the spot where her sister had fallen and opened the door. The prince stood there, handsome and regal. He smiled at her. You must be Elara, he said. I have come to take you to your destiny. Mora stepped into the golden palace, and her breath caught in her throat. The floors were made of polished marble, and the ceilings were painted with angels. Servants bowed low as she passed, whispering about her beauty. But then, Mora froze. In the center of the main hall was a massive, splashing fountain. The water sprayed high into the air, glistening like diamonds. Mora remembered the merchant's warning, water washes away all lies. Panic gripped her heart. If even one drop of that spray touched her cheek, her mask would vanish, and everyone would see who she really was. Stop! Mora shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. The servants jumped, and the guards looked confused. Turn off the water. I command it. The prince looked at her, surprised. But Elara, he said gently, the fountains have flowed for 100 years. They are the heart of the palace. Mora forced a smile, though her hands were shaking. The moisture, she lied quickly. It is bad for the magical silk. The dampness will ruin the threads. The prince nodded slowly. Of course. Your gift is precious. We will drain the fountains immediately. As the water stopped flowing, the queen mother stepped forward. She was a stern woman with sharp eyes. Welcome, child, she said. We have heard of your miracle. Please, sit at the royal loom and show us a small sample of your magic. Mora's blood ran cold. She had no magic to show. Far away from the palace luxury, Elara woke up in the cold, smelly mud of the forbidden forest. Her head throbbed with pain. She tried to call out for her sister, but when she opened her mouth, no sound came out. Her throat felt empty and dry. She touched her neck in horror. Her voice was gone. She was alone, in the dumping grounds where the villagers threw their trash, wearing only a thin, torn slip. Tears streamed down her face as she realized she had been betrayed. Suddenly, a loud snort made her freeze. A wild boar, huge and angry, stepped out of the bushes. Its tusks were sharp, and it scraped the ground, ready to charge. Elara had no weapon. She had no voice to scream for help. The boar charged. Instinct took over. Elara grabbed a handful of long, tough vines from the ground. Her fingers moved faster than thought. In seconds, she wove the vines together. Just as the boar leaped, Elara held up the vines. She had woven them into a steady, thick shield. The boar crashed into it with a loud thud and bounced back, stunned. The animal shook its head and ran away in fear. Elara looked at the shield in her hands. It was perfect. They had taken her voice and her name, but they could not take the magic in her hands. Back in the palace, the sun went down, casting long shadows across the royal weaving room. Mora stood in front of the grand loom made of ivory. The queen mother had left, but she expected to see a masterpiece in the morning. Mora picked up the golden thread. She tried to weave, but her fingers were clumsy. The cloth she made was lumpy and full of holes. It looked nothing like Elara's work. Desperate, Mora went to the window and whispered into the dark, "Merchant, I need you." A shadow in the corner of the room grew taller until it became the shadow merchant. He chuckled dryly. "Trouble in paradise, my queen. I cannot weave." Mora hissed. "They will know I am a fraud by morning. Give me something that looks like magic." The merchant reached into his cloak and pulled out a spool of thread that shimmered with a ghostly, pale light. "This is ghost silk," he said. "Spun by spiders in the deep caves. It looks beautiful, but it is cold to the touch." Mora grabbed it eagerly. "It is perfect." "Wait," the merchant said, holding onto the spool. "The price is different this time. To use the silk of the dark, you must give up your peace. You will never sleep soundly again. Nightmares will haunt you every time you close your eyes." Mora didn't hesitate. "I don't care about sleep," she said. "I only care about the crown." Elara walked for hours until her feet bled. She reached the banks of the River of Whispers. The water here glowed with a soft blue light. Elara fell to her knees and wept silently, begging the river for help. She wanted her voice back so she could tell the prince the truth. The water began to swirl and bubble. Slowly, a figure rose from the depths, the river spirit. She was tall and made entirely of flowing water. "Why do you weep, daughter of the loom?" the spirit asked, her voice sounding like crashing waves. Elara pointed to her throat and then to the palace in the distance. She clasped her hands in a pleading motion. The spirit shook her head. "I cannot give you your voice. Not yet." Elara's shoulders slumped. The spirit continued, "You lost your voice because you were silent when envy grew in your home. You let your sister's darkness grow. To get your voice back, you must speak with your actions, not your tongue." The spirit waved her hand, and pieces of driftwood washed ashore. They arranged themselves into a rough, simple loom. "Weave the truth," the spirit commanded. "Use the reeds of the river and the light of the moon. If your heart is pure, the magic will return. But if you weave with hate, the threads will snap." Elara wiped her eyes. She sat at the driftwood loom and picked up a river reed. The next morning, Mora presented a gift to the prince to distract him from her lack of work. It was a handkerchief woven from the ghost silk. It shimmered beautifully in the sunlight. "For you, my love," Mora said, forcing a sweet smile. The prince was enchanted. "It is as soft as a cloud," he said, though when he touched it, a strange chill went up his arm. He ignored the feeling, blinded by his love for the girl he thought was Elara. Later that afternoon, the prince and Mora walked in the royal gardens. It was a hot day, and beads of sweat formed on the prince's forehead. He pulled out the beautiful handkerchief to wipe his brow. Mora's eyes went wide with terror. "No," she cried, but it was too late. The moment the ghost silk touched the sweat, which is just salty water, the magic unraveled. The beautiful handkerchief instantly turned into a pile of grey, crumbling dust in the prince's hand. He stared at the grey powder, confused. "What happened?" he asked. "It turned to dust." Mora's heart hammered against her ribs. She had to lie quickly. "It is the air here," she exclaimed, grabbing his hand. "The air in the garden is too dry for such delicate magic. I told you, my silk is very sensitive." The prince brushed the dust away, looking doubtful. "Perhaps," he said slowly. "But I have never seen gold turn to dust before." A dark cloud settled over the golden palace. The king, who had been strong as an ox, suddenly fell very ill. His skin turned grey, and his breathing became shallow. The best doctors in the kingdom tried every medicine, but nothing worked. The royal physician shook his head gravely. "This is a sickness of the spirit," he announced to the weeping court. "Only the shroud of life, woven by the chosen weaver, can draw the poison out. It must be made of pure golden silk." All eyes turned to Mora. Mora stood by the king's bedside, her hands trembling inside her long sleeves. She knew she could not weave the shroud. If she tried, it would be rough and useless. But everyone was watching. She had to pretend. "I will start at once," she said, her voice shaking. She reached out to pat the king's hand to comfort him. But the moment Mora's skin touched the king's hand, the old man gasped in pain. He pulled his hand away as if he had been burned. "Cold," the king wheezed, his eyes wide with fear. "Why are your hands so cold, child?" Mora quickly pulled back. "It is just the stress, your majesty," she lied, but the queen mother narrowed her eyes. The air in the room felt heavy, and for the first time, the court did not look at Mora with love, but with worry. Deep in the woods, Elara sat at her driftwood loom by the river. She had no golden thread, so she pulled the long, green reeds from the water. As she wove them, the moonlight hit the loom, and something magical happened. The rough green reeds turned into a soft, glowing silver blanket. It wasn't gold like the palace silk, but it hummed with a warm, healing energy. Elara worked tirelessly, her heart full of hope. One evening, an old woodcutter stumbled into her clearing. He was bent over, groaning with a terrible pain in his back. He saw Elara and froze. She looked wild, with messy hair and mud on her face, but her eyes were kind. She couldn't speak, so she walked over and gently placed the silver blanket on his shoulders. The woodcutter gasped. Heat rushed through his body. He stood up straight, his back cracking and popping into place. The pain was gone instantly. "You are a healer," he cried out in joy. Elara smiled sadly and went back to her loom. The woodcutter ran back to the village tavern that night. "There is a witch in the woods," he told everyone, his eyes shining. "But she is not wicked. She is a saint in rags. She weaves moonlight into medicine." The rumors of the forest healer spread like wildfire. Soon, whispers reached the Golden Palace. Servants gossiped in the hallways about the mute girl who cured the sick with silver blankets. Mora heard these whispers while she was pretending to weave in her tower. She dropped her shuttle. Her blood ran cold. She knew exactly who it was. Elara was alive, and her magic was growing stronger. Mora paced the floor, biting her nails until they bled. If the prince heard about a mute weaver who looked just like her, he would figure it out. She summoned the shadow merchant immediately. He appeared from behind the curtain, smelling of smoke and old dust. "She is still alive." Mora screamed at him. "You said you took care of her." The merchant shrugged. "I threw her away. I did not kill her. Fate is a tricky thing. Mora grabbed the merchant's cloak. Fix it, she hissed. Destroy her. Destroy everything she has. I cannot have a rival. The merchant grinned, his eyes glowing red in the dark room. I do not kill, he reminded her. But I can collect. I will send the hounds of smoke to bring her loom to ash. But remember, Queen, every favor adds to your debt. While Mara plotted in the tower, the prince sat in the royal archives, surrounded by dust and ancient scrolls. He could not sleep. He kept thinking about the handkerchief that had turned to dust. He found a large, leather-bound book titled The History of the Golden Gift. He opened it to the chapter on the chosen weavers. He read the words aloud, "True golden silk is stronger than steel. It does not burn, it does not tear, and it never, ever fades." The prince looked up. He pulled out a piece of the cotton Mara had woven, which was actually the dyed ribbon from the market. It was already losing its color, turning a dull yellow at the edges. "It fades," the prince whispered. And the handkerchief turned to dust. A terrible knot formed in his stomach. He loved the girl in the tower, but his heart told him something was wrong. Why was the king getting worse? Why was the sick dying? He stood up, slamming the book shut. "I need to know the truth," he said to the empty room. He decided he would ask her one more time in the morning, and look into her eyes. If she lied, he would know. That night, the forbidden forest was silent. Suddenly, the shadows under the trees began to move. They twisted and grew until they formed the shapes of giant wolves made of black smoke. Their eyes were burning red coals. The shadow merchant had sent his hounds. They growled and charged toward Elara's clearing. Elara woke up to the sound of snapping twigs. She saw the monsters coming. She was terrified, but she remembered the river spirit's words, "Weave the truth." She jumped to her driftwood loom. She didn't have a weapon, so she started weaving with the silver thread as fast as lightning. The wolves lunged at her. Just as their jaws opened, Elara pulled the cloth from the loom and threw it into the air. It wasn't a blanket, it was a net of pure, blinding light. The net fell over the smoke wolves. Boom! A massive explosion of white light blasted through the forest. It was brighter than lightning. The smoke wolves dissolved into nothing with a high-pitched shriek. The light shot up into the sky, piercing the darkness for miles. From the balcony of the palace, the prince saw the flash. It lit up the horizon like a second sun. He gripped the railing. "That is not wildfire," he said, his eyes narrowing. "That is magic." The next morning, the palace was buzzing with news of the strange light in the forest. Mora was terrified. She told the servants to close all the curtains and claimed she had a terrible headache. But the prince was already in the stables, putting a saddle on his fastest horse. Mora ran down to the courtyard, still in her nightgown. "Where are you going?" she cried, grabbing the horse's reins. "The king needs us here." The prince looked down at her. His face was serious. "I am going to the forest," he said. "That light was magic. If there is a healer there who can save my father, I must find them." Mora's face went pale. "It is dangerous." "It is probably a monster," she pleaded. "I am the chosen weaver. I will cure the king." The prince gently removed her hand from the reins. "If you are the chosen one, then you have nothing to fear from a rival," he said quietly. He spurred his horse and galloped out of the gates. Mora watched him go, panic rising in her throat like bile. She turned to the captain of the royal guard. "Follow him," she ordered, her voice trembling. "And if you find anyone in the woods, arrest them. They are a witch who seeks to curse the king." The prince rode hard until he reached the clearing where the light had exploded. The smell of ozone and burnt wood hung in the air. The driftwood loom was smashed to pieces, destroyed by the force of the magic blast. The prince dismounted and walked through the ashes. "Hello," he called out. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered him. Elara was gone. She had fled deeper into the woods when the wolves attacked. But as the prince kicked through the blackened soil, something caught his eye. A small scrap of fabric was stuck to a thorn bush. It wasn't grey or burnt. It was glowing with a warm, steady golden light. The prince picked it up. The fabric felt warm in his hand, like living skin. He rubbed it with his thumb. It did not fade. He poured water from his canteen onto it. It did not dissolve, it only shined brighter. The prince's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the real magic. This was the gift of the loom. And it wasn't in the palace. He looked back toward the castle towers. "Who is sitting on the throne?" he whispered. Elara had run for miles, her feet bare and bleeding. She knew she couldn't stay in the forest, the shadows would find her again. She had to go to the only place left, the capital. She rubbed mud on her face and wrapped herself in a torn grey shawl she found on a scarecrow. She looked like a beggar, invisible to the world. She limped through the city gates. The streets were filled with banners showing Mora's face. "Long live Queen Elara," the poster said. Seeing her sister's face being celebrated stung Elara's heart. She wanted to scream, "That is me. That is my name." But the river spirit's voice echoed in her mind, "Do not hate. Hate snaps the thread." Elara took a deep breath and walked to the back of the palace. The kitchens were hiring extra help for the king's feast. "I can scrub pots," she motioned to the head cook. The cook looked at the ragged girl. He felt a strange pity. "All right," he grunted. "Get in there. But keep your head down." Elara entered the palace, not as a queen, but as a servant. She was close to her enemy now. The night of the king's feast arrived. The great hall was filled with nobles, but the mood was fearful. The king was wheeled in, looking like a skeleton. He was barely breathing. Mora stood up, holding a shimmering robe. It was the shroud of life she had promised. In reality, she had bought it from the shadow merchant that morning, paying with a vial of her own blood. "Father," Mora said, her voice trembling. "Wear this, and you shall be healed." The king's attendants gently placed the robe on him. For a second, color returned to the king's cheeks. The court gasped in hope. But then, the king's eyes rolled back. He began to cough violently, black, tar-like blood spilled from his lips. The robe wasn't healing him, it was draining the last of his life to feed the dark magic. "Take it off," the prince shouted, bursting into the hall. He had just returned from the forest. He drew his sword and cut the robe of his father. The king gasped for air, collapsing back into his chair. The robe lay on the floor, hissing like a snake. The prince pointed his sword at Mora. "What have you done?" he roared. "You are killing him." The music stopped. The nobles gasped. Mora stood frozen, her mask of smoke still hiding her true face, but her eyes were wild with panic. "How dare you?" she screamed. "I am your betrothed. I am the golden weaver. The king is just too weak for the magic." The prince reached into his pocket and pulled out the small scrap of fabric he found in the forest. He held it up. It glowed so brightly it made the candles look dim. "This is the golden gift," he shouted. "It heals. It warms. It does not drink blood." He threw the scrap onto the table next to Mora's grey, hissing robe. The contrast was clear to everyone. One was light, the other was death. "One of these is a lie," the prince declared, his voice cold as ice. "And I think the liar is standing right in front of me." Mora was cornered. She looked around the room, desperate for a way out. She saw the kitchen servants peeking through the back door. She pointed a shaking finger at them. "It is sabotage," she shrieked. "There is a spy." A witch among the servants has cursed my work. Arrest them all. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my folktale story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. I demand a trial. Mora shouted, her voice echoing off the high stone walls. She knew she had one trick left. She would use the shadow merchant's final gift, the black needle. It was a cursed tool that would weave by itself, moving her hands like a puppet. I will weave the sun god's tapestry right now, in front of everyone. I will prove that I'm the true queen and that these servants are the ones poisoning the king. The prince stared at her coldly. He didn't trust her, but he needed to be sure. Very well, he said. Bring the great loom into the hall. He turned to the guards who were holding the terrified kitchen staff. Let them stay. Everyone must witness this. If you are truly the golden weaver, no spy can stop your light. Elara stood at the back of the room, her heart pounding. She watched her sister's desperate eyes. She felt a mix of sadness and determination. The river spirit had told her to weave the truth. She squeezed her hands into fists. She didn't have a loom, but she had her presence. She knew that darkness could not perform when the light stood close. The servants huddled around her, sensing that this quiet, muddy girl was their only hope. The heavy loom was dragged into the center of the room. The trial had begun. Mora sat at the loom. The silence in the hall was heavy and suffocating. She slipped the black needle from her sleeve. As soon as she touched it, she felt a sharp pain. It bit into her finger, drinking a drop of her blood. This was the fuel it needed. Suddenly, the needle jerked forward, pulling Mora's hand with it. She wasn't weaving, she was being dragged. Her arms flailed in unnatural, jerky motions. The thread that came out was fast, but it wasn't golden. It was a dark, bruised purple. The tapestry began to form a picture, but it was twisted. It showed a kingdom in flames, not in peace. The nobles whispered nervously. Is that the sun? Someone asked. It looks like a dying eye. Mora's sweat poured down her neck under the mask. The needle was moving too fast, it was hurting her. Suddenly, Elara stepped forward from the line of servants. She didn't run, she walked with a calm, heavy step. She stopped 10 feet from the loom. She closed her eyes and focused on the love she felt for her village, for the river, even for her lost sister. The sheer power of her honest spirit hit the cursed needle like a wall. The needle stuttered. It slowed down. It stopped moving, shaking violently as if afraid of the girl in rags. Why did you stop? The prince demanded, stepping closer. Mora pulled frantically at the needle, but it was stuck in the web. Seize her, she screamed, pointing at Elara. The witch is stopping me with her mind. The prince held up his hand to stop the guards. No, he commanded. Let the beggar approach. Elara walked up to the loom. She looked into Mora's terrified eyes. Elara didn't push her sister. Instead, she reached out and touched the dark, purple thread on the loom. The moment her fingers made contact, a hum filled the room, the sound of a choir singing. Elara pushed her own magic into the cursed web. It was too much for the shadow magic to handle. The black needle shrieked, a high, metal scream, and snapped in half. The purple threads turned to ash and blew away. The feedback loop blasted Mora backward. She fell off the stool, crashing onto the stone floor. The illusion was breaking. The room spun. The queen was on the floor, and the beggar stood tall, her hands glowing with pure, undeniable gold light. Mora scrambled backward, crab-walking away from the loom. Stay back, she shrieked. I am the queen. Do not look at her. Elara saw the pitcher of water on the king's dinner table. She remembered the rule of the mask, water washes away all lies. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the heavy silver pitcher. The guards gasped, thinking she was going to hit her sister. Instead, Elara swung the pitcher and splashed the water in a wide arc. The water hit Mora square in the face. Time seemed to freeze. Steam hissed loudly as the water touched the magic mask. Mora screamed, clawing at her cheeks. The beautiful face of Elara dissolved like wet paint. In its place, the court saw Mora's true face. But it was no longer identical to Elara's. The use of shadow magic had twisted it. Her skin was grey, her eyes were sunk deep in dark circles, and her mouth was twisted in a permanent scowl of envy. The court recoiled in horror. The prince looked from the monster on the floor to the girl standing with the pitcher. Elara opened her mouth. The curse of silence was broken by the truth. The truth, Elara said, her voice clear and bell-like, cannot be washed away. Suddenly, the room darkened. The shadow merchant materialized from the corner, reaching for Mora. A debt is a debt, he hissed. You failed. Your soul is mine. Elara spun around. She didn't weave thread, she wove pure light with her hands, casting a blinding barrier between her sister and the demon. Be gone, Elara commanded. The light smashed into the merchant, dissolving him into harmless smoke that drifted out the window. He was gone. Elara turned to the loom. She touched the empty frame, and in seconds, she wove a golden blanket. She placed it over the king. He took a deep breath, his skin turning pink and healthy instantly. The nightmare was over. Mora was not executed, but she was banished to the caves to weave nets for fishermen, a humble job where she could not hurt anyone. The prince asked Elara to marry him. She agreed, but on one condition: she would not live in a high tower. She built her weaving room in the town square, where anyone could come for help. She became the greatest queen the land ever known, not because of her crown, but because of her kindness. The story you have just heard is a beautiful African tale I heard long ago. I'm telling you to wake your minds to this lesson: envy is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. If you were the protagonist, what would you do? Would you have forgiven your sister, or let the shadows take her? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. God bless you, and may courage guide your hands. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I am leaving you with one of the channel's most beloved folktales. I am sure you'll love it. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.